There are some absolute bargain used four-wheel drives out there these days that cost way less than they should. So we're going to go through a bit of a short list of a bunch of four-wheel drives that we reckon are selling for way less than they should be, and how you can get an absolute bargain on one. So let's hook in and check them out. Land Rovers don't exactly have the best reputation for being all that reliable. But the Discovery 1 and the Disco 2 can be turned into tough off-road weapons or good all-round tourers, provided you know what to look out for on them. Plus, for what you get for a comfy, coil-sprung wagon, it's actually pretty crazy how cheap you can pick one of these up for.
We've chosen the two earlier model Discos, the Disco 1 and Disco 2. This Disco is on the list because you get coil springs all round for a capable tourer or off-road four-wheel drive. They're comfortable to daily drive, and for under 10k you can get yourself a coil sprung four-wheel drive with plenty of aftermarket support to make them extremely capable off-road. The Disco 1 you can pick up for around the 5k mark, and the Disco 2 around 8 to 10 grand will get you a decent one. The Disco 1 has the 4-cylinder turbo diesel, which is pretty bush-proof and reliable. The TDI is easy to get parts for and a great on fuel in the manual model. On the negative side, they're a small engine with little power. They have weak head gaskets, and earlier models are known for timing belt failure.
The TD5 was a bit of a different story. They can make more power than the TDI, but they had a few more common issues, and with the Series 2, they started coming out with things like ABS and traction control, which presented a few more common reliability issues.
The Disco 2 has the TD5 turbo diesel, which has a bit more power and is a bit nicer to drive than the TDI. This one has a timing chain, not a belt, which is much more bush-proof. However, they are more complicated engines with lots of common electrical faults that you need a diagnostic tool to fix. Also, pre-2002 engines had plastic head locator dowels which let the head shimmy and can do a head gasket after a few 100,000 Ks.
The dreaded three amigos in the Disco 2, which is these three lights here, that disable traction control and various other systems, can be caused by things like loose wheel bearings, faulty wheel speed or ABS sensors, or faulty ABS units as well.
This is very common in Disco 2s, but the causes can be easily diagnosed with a scan gauge, and it shouldn't deter you from buying one.
Despite a few issues with reliability of the Disco over the years, most can be ironed out, particularly if you're going to be upgrading the vehicle for driving tougher tracks when you add things like bigger tyres, because you're going to be upgrading things like the axles and the driveline as you go along. But we reckon one of the best things about the Disco is even in stock form, it has some of the best suspension you can get in a four-wheel drive. Coil springs all round, live axles and plenty of travel, and you can modify the heck out of them to get the suspension to work really well off-road. Just make sure if you are going to do that, you need to factor it into your budget. The 90 Series Prado was a serious underdog when it comes to getting a reliable and comfortable wagon to tour in. They don't have the following that the big cruisers have, nor do they have the popularity that the Hilux has, despite them sharing similar drivetrain and engine combinations. These days, you can actually pick one up pretty cheap, and we reckon they can be turned into the ultimate family touring wagon.
The Prado's on the list because they're a cheap, reliable and underrated tourer with plenty of storage space. You got Toyota reliability without the price tag of a Hilux or a Land Cruiser, you can comfortably tour with a family, and they also have a coil-sprung 5-link rear end.
The Prado is a little bit nicer inside than the Hilux of the same era. It's a little bit roomier as well. The diesel option of the Prado, which is what this one is, still fetches a price in the low to mid-teens for a clean example, but I reckon that's a pretty good bang for buck option for what you actually get.
You can get a V6 Prado with around 200,000 kilometres on it for around the 8 to 10 mark, and the diesels are going for 15k plus still. In terms of value for money, the 3.4 litre V6 is our pick because it's a reliable, bulletproof engine that goes for almost half the price of a diesel one.
The V6 version of the 90 Series is a tough, reliable and proven engine that'll last for a very long time if it's got a good service history. It's the same engine that's in the earlier model Hiluxes as well, which means there's parts around for them and they're easy to service and maintain.
The 1KZ is still the pick of the engines, but they're still quite expensive too. The fact you could get the 1KZ with the Auto 2 in the Prado also makes it a good option, as this wasn't an option in the Hilux with the same engine. The diesel option had an alloy head which is prone to cracking if the vehicle suffers from overheating due to a poorly maintained cooling system or poor injection. So if you find a diesel one, make sure the cooling system is in good condition and it's never gotten hot, and the injectors have been replaced or maintained regularly. Either option is a cracking budget four-wheel drive that'll be easily built into a reliable tourer. Have you got a Prado? If yes, tell us below what you've got and what you paid for it. We want to hear about all your bargain Prados.
Like with most four-wheel drives, adding a mild suspension lift and some slightly bigger tyres will take the capability to the next level. Particularly with the coil-sprung 5-link rear end in these, you can get some decent wheel travel out of the back. Another thing too is you've actually got a fair bit of space in the back of these, so for one of those touring trips, you can set it up with some drawers for a bit of storage.
You won't find a better value for money dual cab ute than the Holden RC Colorado. This one is on the list because they have one of the most reliable engines on the market in any dual cab ute. The Isuzu built 4JJ1 turbo diesel. Over 10 years on, it's a very similar engine to the one they're using in the new Isuzu D-Max. The 4JJ1 is powerful, reliable, easy to maintain and get parts for, like aftermarket intercoolers, airboxes and specialist parts that these engines benefit from having. The next phase of the Colorado went back to a GM motor, so you need to be buying one that's between 2008 and 2012 when the new Colorado came in. The downside to the Collie is that they're torsion bar front end. Torsion bar suspension often rides harsh because when you wind them up you'll lose front droop. However, if you add a 2-inch lift, a set of heavy duty torsion bars, you'll fit a set of 32s and have a bloody good touring 4-wheel drive. Here's the best thing, you can pick one up with 150,000 Ks for well below 25 grand. And clean versions with around 200 to 250,000 on the clock for the high teens at the moment. Compare this to most other dual cab utes on the market and it's an absolute steal. While the Collie also came out with a petrol, we recommend the diesel in terms of reliability and the ability to modify and upgrade to get more power.
The LN and RN series of Hilux between 1998 to the early 2000s is the same era as my Hilux, just with a few different engine and trim options. The 3-litre turbo diesel Hilux, the 1KZ, which is what this one is still priced pretty high for what they are when in essence it's around a 20-year-old car. But the other variations with the petrol and the non-turbo diesel are a much lower price and they represent a pretty cheap bargain buy.
These Hiluxes are extremely reliable, honest and simple work or touring rigs. Second-hand parts are everywhere for them, which means they're pretty cheap to upgrade if you're after some second-hand bargains like a canopy or a bull bar. Maintenance parts are readily available and easy to source, and these are the last of the Hiluxes built in Japan before production moved to Thailand.
You could get a 2.7-litre 4-cylinder petrol, a 3.4-litre V6 petrol, a 3-litre non-turbo diesel, and a 3-litre turbo diesel as well.
We chose the V6 as the best value engine in the Prado because they're so common, so they sell for less. However, in the Hilux you see a lot more 3RZ petrols than you would the V6, so they're often cheaper. The V6 uses more fuel and are known to have water pump failures, but that's fixed with regular maintenance and inspections. The 5L diesel was sluggish but respond well to a bolt-on turbo kit. The 3RZ engine would have to be our pick because they're cheap, easy to maintain and very reliable. You can pick up a pretty good version of the 3RZ for around 8 to 10 grand, or around 10 to 12 for a cleaner example or a V6. The turbo diesel is still going around for the 15k plus mark.
Hiluxes like this are strong, reliable and perfect medium-sized tourers. If you manage to find one that's been looked after, it'll last you for years to come.
The Pajero's on the list because they've always been the underdog touring wagon. They're super comfortable and capable. Because they didn't get the fanfare the bigger wagons did, you can pick one up in good condition for pretty cheap. They're reliable if well looked after and maintained. The models we think are great buys are the NL, NP and NM Pajeros. NLs are great, however Mitsubishi currently have a buyback scheme for vehicles affected by the Takata airbag recall made between 1997 and 2000. So make sure you don't accidentally get your hands on one with airbags in that era. Regular servicing is key on the Pajes. If you get the petrol variant, it can be a bit of a punish to change the spark plugs on them as you need to remove a section of the inlet manifold, so factor that in if you're planning a big service. The 4M model diesels are an excellent engine. They're very reliable and have good power and torque. They can get very clogged due to the EGR and some 4-wheel drivers add an electronic plug-and-play setup to help mitigate it. We reckon the value for money buy is the 4M series of diesel Pajeros. They're reliable if maintained and all they need is a catch can and maybe an intake clean if you get a high kilometre version. Another thing to consider on the NP Pajero is there are known issues with the fuel pump. If you buy one of these Pajeros and the fuel pump is on the way out, it's an expensive fix, around the 4 to 5 grand mark. so it's definitely something you need to consider if the car has a lot of kilometres. Around $10,000 will get you a good NP Pajero with the 4M diesel without too many kilometres. Low teens for an even cleaner example with less kilometres. Whereas you can grab a decent NL Pajero for around 5 to 8 grand. The perfect budget first four-wheel drive wagon. You'll probably think we're crazy adding an N70 to the best value four-wheel drives list, but there's actually a version that is cracking value, which is the petrol variant. The N70 is on the list because the petrols are a reliable engine, make good power, they still have the same strong Hilux driveline as the diesels, plus there's plenty of aftermarket support for Hiluxes like snorkels, bull bars, suspension, trays and heaps more.
The 1G RFE is a very reliable engine. Because it doesn't make a lot of power for its displacement size, it's pretty understressed. That said though, because it's a 4 litre V6, once you do things like add bigger tyres, you really notice that the fuel economy won't be as good.
The V6 is called a 1G RFE, and while they do use a bit more fuel than the 1KD diesel version, you're paying 10 to 15 grand less for a petty with the same Ks. Now let's do some quick maths. How long does it take up to rack up 15 grand of extra fuel costs with the petrol? Say a diesel gets around 11 litres per 100 Ks and the petrol gets around 18 litres per 100 Ks. After 100,000 Ks, you'd use 7,000 more litres with the petrol. But with the money you saved and fuel prices at the moment, you're getting around 11,200 bucks of extra fuel, which means it'll take you around 3 years to catch up to the price of a diesel. And when you look at it like that, the V6 Hilux is 100% one of the best value buys on the market. Do you own a petrol four-wheel drive? What fuel consumption do you get, and do you think it was worth buying one? Let us know in the comments below.
Well, there you go, that's just our short list of a few four-wheel drives that are on the market right now that are priced way less than we reckon they should be. You never know, you might be able to get yourself an absolute bargain on one of them as well. But are there any four-wheel drives that you've come across that we've missed? Maybe you've managed to score yourself an absolute bargain of a different make and model that isn't in the list and you had a good story about it. Leave it in the comments below and we'll be sure to check it out. Other than that, thanks for watching. I'll catch you next time.